In the dark annals of the Blood Angels, where memory and myth intertwine, there is one figure whose legend eclipses all others, save for the Primarch himself, the Sanguinor, a name spoken with reverence and awe, a figure wreathed in golden light, adorned in armor so resplendent it blinds the eye and stirs the soul. To many, he is not just a warrior. He is a divine answer to a silent prayer, a flame in the void, the embodiment of all that Sanguinius once was and all the Blood Angels hope to be. He does not speak. He does not linger. He does not lead fleets or hold command over war councils. He simply appears, only in the darkest of moments, when defeat presses in from every side and despair has already swallowed hope. It is in that abyss where the Sanguinor descends, a radiant form blazing through smoke and ruin. He lands not with a crash, but with a terrible silence, and where he stands, miracles follow. None know where he comes from. He is never summoned, and no psychic trace heralds his approach. No astropath has ever glimpsed his soul in the warp. His arrival is as unpredictable as it is divine. In every tale, he appears suddenly, without warning, often at the climax of a battle where Blood Angels or their successors are poised on the brink of destruction. A blinding light in the shape of a warrior, descending as if from the heavens themselves, adorned in angelic wings of radiant fire, and wielding weapons not forged but seemingly birthed from purpose alone. The first records of the Sanguinor's intervention stretch back thousands of years, inscribed with trembling hands by reclusiarchs and chaplains who dared to believe they had seen a living vision. These accounts are preserved in the sacred Carta Sanguinorum, a great illuminated tome locked deep within the vaults of the fortress monastery on Baal. Every page sings with reverent script, describing miraculous survivals, impossible victories, and the sudden rapturous arrival of the Golden Angel at the climax of hopeless war zones. One record tells of a siege upon the bastion world of Surthan, where the Blood Angels' Fifth Company was surrounded, their lines shattered, their apothecaries slain. As Xenos war engines breached the walls, a watch sergeant named Varen dropped to his knees and begged for Sanguinius's mercy. The next moment, a flash of gold pierced the blackened sky. When the smoke cleared, the alien machines had been ripped apart, their metal scorched as if by solar flares, and a golden warrior stood among the ruined gates. His glaive glowed with unnatural fire. His wings, though clearly forged of ceramite and plasteel, shimmered with feathers of light. He said nothing. He gave no orders. He simply turned and strode into the enemy host, cutting them down with a fury and elegance unseen since the angel himself. Other testimonies are more surreal. In the apocryphal vision of Brother Adalo of the Lamenters, the Sanguinor did not walk or fly, but drifted across the field like a phantom, untouched by the battle raging around him. To Adalo, the Sanguinor radiated sorrow more than rage, his eyes aglow with mourning rather than wrath. He claimed the golden figure passed him without a glance, placed a hand on a fallen brother's pauldron, and then dissolved into gold-tinted mist. Moments later, the fallen lamenter rose, wounds healed, blade in hand, and led a final charge that shattered the enemy flank. This vision, like many, was dismissed as hallucination, but it found its way into the Codex Angelus, buried between battle protocols and litanies of absolution. Despite the abundance of stories, none offer clarity about what the Sanguinor truly is. Some Blood Angels chaplains proclaim him to be the Emperor's will incarnate, sent through the warp by divine mandate to protect Sanguinius' legacy. Others claim he is a fragment of the Primarch himself, his honor and sacrifice made manifest, a psychic echo that walks among his sons in times of need. There are more arcane theories, whispered by librarians behind closed doors, that he is a warp construct, a gestalt soul formed from the collective devotion and anguish of the entire chapter, or that he is a forgotten champion from the days of the heresy, bound in duty for eternity. And yet, these theories are but dust before the simple truth of the battlefield. Whatever the Sanguinor is, wherever he comes from, he changes the course of war. On Cadian Ridge, he appeared amid the ashes of 30 fallen battle brothers and turned the tide against the Death Guard. On the moons of Ariston the Thief, he arrived as the last drop pod failed, striking the traitor commander down before the first bolter fired. And during the carnage of Melanchol Prime, where the flesh terrors were nearly annihilated by a demonic incursion, he manifested amid fire and black blood, radiant and wordless, and drove the demon prince back into the warp with a single swing of his glaive. He has been seen by so many, witnessed, drawn, even praised in psalm, but never once has he spoken. Never once has he written a word, led a council, or acknowledged a rank. He does not seem to serve the chapter as a commander would, but rather acts on some higher calling, untethered by the rigid doctrines of the Codex Astartes. He answers only to necessity. Where he is needed most, he comes. To the Blood Angels, he is not merely a protector, but an omen. His presence is taken as a divine sign, one that reshapes morale and solidifies conviction. When the Sanguinor appears, despair turns to righteous fury. Brothers who stood ready to die instead rise to conquer. His form becomes a banner greater than any relic, a proof that they are not alone, that the angel watches, that the emperor remembers, that hope still lives. There are shrines to him now, chapels carved into rock and steel, bearing golden winged icons, sacred texts, and blood-red candles that burn day and night. These sanctuaries are places of meditation used by sanguinary priests and reclusiarchs to commune with the higher virtues of their lineage. Some pray for visions, some seek his protection, others simply kneel, heads bowed, and whisper the names of fallen comrades, trusting the Sanguinor will bear their memory to the side of Sanguinius. But still, he remains a mystery. No Vox recording captures his voice, no Auspex tracks his arrival, no gene seed trace identifies his origin. He is a legend that bleeds into reality, a story carved into flesh and war, not parchment and ink. He is the exemplar of the host, golden, glorious, and unknowable. And when the end comes, when the last walls fall and the final cry is uttered, many believe it is his wings that will cast the last shadow, his blade that will strike the last blow, and his silent gaze that will witness humanity's final breath. The Sanguinor is not a commander. He is not a ghost. He is not a lie. He is the golden promise that no son of Sanguinius will ever truly fight alone. In the dying twilight of the Imperium's golden age, a storm was born, not of nature, but of the warp. The ruin storm, a maelstrom of psychic madness, tore across the stars in the wake of Horus's betrayal, severing Terra from its sons. Galaxies away, the noblest of the Primarchs found himself stranded. Sanguinius, angel of the 9th Legion, stood upon the world of Macragge alongside Robute Guilliman and Lion El Johnson. They had tried to find order in chaos. What they built was a second Imperium, an echo of the dream, fragile and desperate. It was here, amid fear and longing, that the idea of the Sanguinor was first breathed into being. The Imperium Secundus was not a betrayal, but a concession. Cut off from the Astronomicon, the Loyalists had no way of knowing if the Emperor still lived, or if Terra had already fallen to the traitor War Master. They needed hope. They needed a figurehead who could embody the virtue and purity the Imperium had been founded upon. And who else but Sanguinius could play that role? Yet Sanguinius himself hesitated. He saw beyond the present. His visions, those cursed gifts granted by his angelic blood, showed not triumph but tragedy. They showed his own death at the hands of his brother Horus and the shattering of everything they had built. He could not allow himself to be made a symbol. He could not risk being worshipped while the galaxy burned. So he remained in the shadows, guiding from afar, refusing to ascend the throne of this second empire. But the dream would not die. And from this conflict between duty and divinity emerged a solution both brilliant and horrifying. Captain Azkaelon of the Sanguinary Guard, the stoic shield of the angel, proposed a ritual that would change history forever. If the Primarch could not be present, then one of his chosen would stand in his place, not as a pretender or a regent, but as a reflection, a living vessel through which Sanguinius could act without revealing himself, the herald of the angel, a living icon, a golden lie, sanctified by purpose. Azkaelon summoned 10 of the most devout members of the Sanguinary Guard, veterans whose souls burned brightest, whose loyalty had never once flickered. They gathered in the great chapel of the Halo, where the high vaults bore frescoes of Sanguinius in flight, and walls were etched with psalms of light. There, in silence, Azkaelon presented the scrolls of judgment, 10 slips of blessed parchment, inscribed with prayers and marked with Sanguinius' own blood. Each warrior would draw one. Only one scroll bore the sigil of selection, the mark of the angel. Alatron drew the chosen scroll. He did not speak. He did not weep. He bowed his head and knelt, arms spread, and the rite began. Azkaelon brought forth a helm, a terrible thing, white hot from the forge, shaped in the visage of Sanguinius himself. This was no ordinary helm. It had been crafted with sigils of silence, bound with the relic bone of martyred brothers, and imbued with psychic shielding so dense it glowed. Without a word, the helm was placed upon Alatron's head. It fused to his skull with a hiss like divine fire. He screamed only once. Then silence. The golden armor came next, forged in secret, piece by piece, by artisans who had never seen the design in full. Each plate was inscribed with one of Sanguinius' virtues: mercy, honor, sacrifice, hope. When fully clad, Alatron no longer looked like himself. He looked like a legend given flesh. He looked like the echo of a Primarch, but the final step was the death of his name. Azkaelon turned to the others. One among them, Haratial, stepped forward. By oath, he would be the only one allowed to know the truth of the new Sanguinor's identity. And by oath, he would take that knowledge to the grave. Horatial knelt before Alatron, placed his gauntlet over his heart, and whispered a name that has never been recorded. Then he drew his blade and ended his own life before the altar. Thus was the bargain sealed. 10 became 9. 1 became myth. The new being, neither Alatron nor holy Sanguinius, rose and took his first steps, his wings sculpted from golden ceramite and wound with plasma filaments unfurled behind him. He walked to the throne of the Imperium Secundus, not as a man, but as the angel's emissary. In council meetings, he stood in silence beside Guilliman, a gleaming reminder of Sanguinius's presence. In battle, he fought with inhuman grace, striking down traitors without a word, his glaive cutting through heretics as if guided by fate itself. But it could not last. When the traitor forces drew near, when the demon Madail rose to challenge Sanguinius upon the haunted world of Davin, the herald knew his time had come. The lie could no longer hold. Sanguinius would face his doom, and the echo could not take his place. But the herald could shield him just once more. And so he stepped into the breach, blade drawn, and faced the demon prince head-on. In that confrontation, something happened, something none can fully explain. The warp folded around them. Time buckled. And as the Primarch watched, the herald began to change. Light consumed him. The helm that had once fused to flesh now fused to soul. Wings that had once been forged now beat with the force of stars. Alatron the man died, but something greater rose. He was no longer the herald, he was the golden angel, the Sanguinor. Since that moment, no record places him among the living ranks of the Ninth. He vanished from the rosters, from the honor rolls, from remembrance. But he reappeared again and again, across centuries, across star systems, always when the darkness crept too close, always when the sons of Sanguinius stood at the edge. The birth of the Sanguinor was not marked with trumpet nor herald, nor written in formal annals. It was a sacrifice hidden in ritual, sealed with death, and lit by divine flame. It was the moment a man became more than mortal, a soul so steeped in loyalty, in sacrifice, in purity, that even the Imperium could not corrupt it. Some say Sanguinius guided the ritual. Others believe the Emperor himself watched that chamber and allowed it. But those who know the truth, or suspect it, guard it with their lives. And so the Imperium Secundus, born in fear and faith, gave birth to something more enduring than any empire, a symbol, a blade of golden vengeance, a living reminder that even when Sanguinius is gone, his light will always return. The Sanguinor was not created by accident. He was made with purpose, forged in blood, sacrifice, and silence. And from that moment onward, no angel of death would ever fly alone. There are places in the galaxy so steeped in corruption that even the warp itself recoils from their memory. One such place is Davin, the world that first poisoned War Master Horus, the site where the great heresy began to take shape. Long after that infamous betrayal, long after the War Master's march toward Terra had begun, the cursed soil of Davin would draw yet another soul into its malignant grasp. But this time the warp would not find a willing servant. It would find something far more dangerous. A soul so radiant, so unbreakable, that not even its nightmares could twist it. This was the place where the being known as the Sanguinor would be truly born. The campaign against Davin was not part of the grand strategy of the Imperium Secundus. It was a detour, a compulsion. Sanguinius, ever plagued by visions and haunted dreams, could not ignore the voices calling from that forsaken moon. While others counseled caution, he insisted on returning to the place where Horus fell, believing that some truth or redemption might yet be unearthed. It was not strategy that led the Angel of Baal back to Davin. It was destiny. When the Blood Angel's fleet arrived in orbit, they found Davin as twisted as the old records described. The very air shimmered with taint. The terrain had changed, bloated and overgrown, like a corpse left too long to rot. Buildings once imperial now stood as shrines to the unclean gods. And deeper still, beneath the veils of plague fog and murmuring winds, something ancient stirred. A demon, Madail, a bloodthirster of Khorne, had anchored its essence to the world. It had been waiting for Sanguinius. The angel descended alone, for he would not risk his sons. But his herald, the silent figure once known as Alatron, was not far behind. Clad in the gilded armor forged during the Imperium Secundus, his wings folded against his back, the herald had followed out of duty, not command. Though he bore the face of Sanguinius and the bearing of a saint, he was still a man with a name, a memory, and a final purpose. The confrontation was not immediate. Davin's warp-tainted landscape stretched like a graveyard of forgotten dreams, pulsing with unnatural energy. Sanguinius pressed forward toward the corrupted temple at the heart of the world, where once Horus had bled his soul out into the warp. The herald followed at a distance, unseen, unheard, but ever watching. He felt the pull as well, but not toward glory, toward sacrifice. Within the desecrated temple, the demon Madail revealed itself, not merely a beast of claw and rage, but a creature of old malice. It spoke with Horus's voice, mocking the angel for arriving too late, for clinging to a dying emperor, for refusing the inevitable. It offered visions of a galaxy aflame, of Sanguinius nailed to a black sun, of his sons twisted into gibbering monsters. Sanguinius stood tall, unmoved, but the warp is cunning. It needed not to break the angel. It only needed him distracted long enough to act. And so it opened a rift. From the heart of the temple, reality screamed. A portal, pulsing, jagged, alive, tore itself into being. Warp energy flowed from it like a tidal wave, devouring the chamber in crimson flame. The demons surged forward. Sanguinius raised his sword, preparing for the battle that would claim his life. But he was not alone. The herald moved without hesitation. There was no call for aid, no order given, no time for discussion. He stepped forward, drawing his glaive, and leapt into the path of the demon. He struck once, a blow that rang like a cathedral bell, knocking Madail back. Sanguinius turned in shock, but the herald merely shook his head. The portal's pull had grown stronger. The warp wanted a soul, and it would not leave empty-handed. In that moment, everything changed. What happened next would be recounted in 100 different ways. Some said the herald was lifted into the air by invisible chains of fire. Others claimed he walked willingly into the rift, dragging the daemon with him, wings blazing like comets. One reclusiarch's vision painted the scene as a celestial ascension. A golden figure rising above a sea of black, his voice finally heard in a single word: "Remember." But the truth, as always, lies somewhere between miracle and madness. What is known is this: the herald and the demon vanished into the warp together. The portal collapsed. Sanguinius stood alone in the ruin, eyes burning, fists clenched. He had seen the transformation, seen his captain's flesh become light, his armor glow with divine fury. The man known as Alatron was gone. What remained was something else entirely: the Sanguinor. Unlike before, when he had been merely a living proxy for the Primarch, something deeper had now taken root. The herald's soul, forged in devotion, had been hurled into the warp's heart, and instead of being consumed, it had been transformed, purified, elevated. A spark of Sanguinius' own essence, perhaps, or something drawn from the Astronomicon itself, had wrapped around that loyal spirit and remade it. The result was no longer mortal. From that day on, the Golden Warrior would appear again and again, far from Davin, far from Baal, with no record of departure or arrival. The Sanguinor no longer answered to captains or codices. He belonged to something greater, a will beyond the veil, a purpose forged not by command, but by necessity. Sanguinius never spoke publicly of what had happened on Davin. He made no announcement. He gave no orders to seek the herald. In private, it's said he wept, not just for the loss of a brother, but for the knowledge that his legacy would one day need saving, that someone would have to carry the light when he could no longer do so himself. The Blood Angels never recovered a body, nor did they build a tomb. Instead, they erected a shrine in the deepest chamber of their monastery, lit by golden candles and guarded by silent sentinels. At its center stands a single relic, the helm of the Sanguinor, no longer white-hot, but gleaming gold, untouched by time. Beneath it, a plaque bears no name, only a single word etched in High Gothic: sacrifice. And so the Sanguinor was born, not of ceremony, not of apotheosis, but of a single act of selfless courage in the darkest of places. In the warp's hateful eye, a mortal soul refused to break. And from that defiance came a being who would never kneel, never speak, never rest. Only fight, only protect, only serve. Davin had tried to claim another soul that day. Instead, it had birthed a legend. There is a truth whispered in the halls of Baal, spoken softly in the meditative cloisters of the sanguinary priests and carved into the devotional reliquaries borne on battlefields across the stars. The Sanguinor never comes early and never comes late. He arrives when all else has failed, when the light is extinguished, and when there is nothing left but the scream of dying warriors and the echo of final prayers. Such are the circumstances under which the Sanguinor makes his presence known. He is not a constant guardian nor a predictable savior. His appearance is not summoned by rank or ritual, nor can it be demanded by the most venerable of chaplains. His intervention cannot be orchestrated. No prophecy can track his footsteps. Instead, he descends at the pivotal moment, when the thread between triumph and oblivion has stretched taut, one fraying heartbeat from snapping. Throughout the millennia, the Blood Angels and their successor chapters have recorded these appearances with obsessive reverence. They call these moments the Crucibles of Gold, moments when a company, squad, or even a single brother faces the edge of annihilation, and the Sanguinor arrives like a flame bursting through the void. In every record, his entrance is dramatic, nearly apocalyptic, a streak of light across the heavens, wings ablaze, crashing down into the heart of despair like a wrathful seraph. One such moment came during the siege of Griffin 6, a brutal attrition war against the Orc Empire of Wazgraka Skulkrumpa. The tech adepts of Griffin were on the verge of collapse, their forges overrun, their knight households slain or scattered. The Blood Angels' 8th Company had been dispatched to assist, but even they found themselves overwhelmed. The greenskin tide was endless, thundering across plains with Stompies and Gorkanauts leading the charge, and the orbital support had been cut off by a looted Mechanicus battleship now turned against its creators. Within the ravaged manufactorum of Hexium's Hollow, a mere 17 Blood Angels stood in defiance, holding a crumbling gate that once controlled power to the planet's core. Their captain, Donarus Valen, had lost both arms to a mega claw and fought on with chainswords affixed to the sockets. They were encircled, wounded, without vox relay, and with their apothecary dead. Donarus looked upon his brothers, some stripped of armor, others using servitor limbs to carry bolters, and whispered Sanguinius's name, not for salvation, but for the strength to die on their feet. That was when the storm hit. A shriek tore through the upper atmosphere. To witnesses still alive in orbit, it was described as a golden bolt breaching the clouds, trailing contrails of molten white. It fell with the weight of judgment, sundering a kilometer-wide swath of Orc advance. From the center of the crater emerged the Sanguinor, glimmering and silent, his wings spreading wider than a storm raven's frame, and his glaive blazing like the morning star. With every motion, the battlefield bent around him, not through sorcery, but sheer presence. Bolts ricocheted away from him, shrapnel stopped short, orcs froze mid-charge as if facing a force they could not comprehend. The Blood Angels did not need a command. They rose with newfound fire, rallied to his presence like iron drawn to a lodestone. The enemy faltered. Gorkanauts lost their footing. The air itself trembled under each stroke of the Sanguinor's blade. He never spoke. He never turned. He simply fought, each swing a hymn of vengeance. Donarus would later say he no longer felt pain while the Sanguinor stood beside him, that his nerves, shattered by trauma, were restored, that his vision, half lost to plasma burn, returned. He described the Golden Warrior as both angel and weapon, a vessel of judgment who bore the fury of Sanguinius without the grief. By the time the final Orc warboss was torn in half by the Sanguinor's glaive, the tide had turned. The surviving Marines recaptured the power core, sent a relay flare, and held the sector until reinforcements could breach orbit. And then, as always, the Sanguinor vanished. The battlefield was scorched, but no tracks remained. His armor left no residual energy signature. The The crater where he had landed cooled unnaturally fast, as if the very ground rejected the memory of his descent. Donaris and his men searched for him, desperately, reverently, but found only silence. The tech priests who later examined the site found electromagnetic disturbances that mimicked warp anomalies, but with no psychic signature. They deemed it divine interference. Moments like this are scattered across the archives. The Battle of Harkin Reach, where the Astral Knights fought against a Genestealer cult embedded in a planetary governor's inner court. At the height of the conflict, as the corrupted PDF swarmed the palace gates and the company's banner-bearer fell, the Sanguinor descended through the great dome of the capital cathedral, scattering Xenos with a single sweep of his radiant wings. Or during the siege of Erelon's spire, when the Lamenters, cursed and weary from endless crusades, found themselves pinned by Iron Warrior's artillery on a broken moon. As the last Vox crackled its final request for reinforcement, and the sergeant prepared to overload his reactor in defiance, the Sanguinor arrived in total silence, dismantling 3 enemy gun emplacements before the Lamenters even realized what they were witnessing. He never looked back, even as the surviving Lamenters wept in disbelief. These interventions are not grand campaigns. They are not crusades waged across systems. They are singular, intimate acts of salvation, moments where one handful of warriors is given back their chance to fight. The Sanguinor does not turn wars with strategy. He turns men with faith. There is a saying among the reclusiarchs of Baal: when the last light fades, the angel glows. It is an aphorism built not on theology, but experience. The Sanguinor represents the moment hope becomes defiance. He is not summoned by banners or rites, but by resolve that refuses to die. Where others would break, the blood angels endure. And in that final stand, he comes. And yet, his presence is not always a gift, for there is a weight to witnessing him. Survivors speak of a strange calm afterward, a stillness of the spirit. Some describe it as peace, others as mourning, as if the Sanguinor carries not only vengeance, but judgment, that in saving them he sees them as they are, stripped of pretense, and not all who are saved are left unscarred. Brother Alvius of the Angels, in Carmine, never fought again after witnessing the Sanguinor on Valoris 9. He claimed he had touched the hem of a god's cloak, and to raise a bolter afterward felt blasphemous. Others report dreams of golden halls and wings in the darkness, of voices not heard but felt, of light that doesn't warm but warns. And always there is the silence. The Sanguinor does not speak. He does not acknowledge. He never thanks or reprimands. His presence is a force, like gravity or fire. He exists only for the moment of impact, and then he is gone. Yet wherever he appears, the message is clear. You are not alone. Even in the darkest moments, when the Emperor seems distant and Sanguinius long dead, when the skies are black with ash, and the only sound is screaming, he comes, the Golden Avenger. The final breath before extinction, and the first blow of redemption. There are few figures in the Imperium of man who elicit as much awe, confusion, and theological debate as the Sanguinor. Within the shadowed halls of Baal, among the illuminated tomes of the librarians and the whispered rites of the chaplains, the Golden Angel is a subject not merely of reverence, but of intense scrutiny. He is at once miracle and mystery, reality blurred with legend, his very existence stretching the fragile boundaries between divinity and duty. In the war-tempered minds of the Blood Angels, who have endured millennia of loss, mutation, and sacrifice, the Sanguinor represents a paradox, an angel of mercy born in blood. He is a being whose interventions have saved countless lives, whose radiant form has turned the tide of hopeless battles, yet whose origins remain elusive even to the chapter's most enlightened scholars. And so, the theologians gather. Within the reclusium vaults of the Red Basilica, deep beneath Baal's scorched surface, there exists a chamber barred to all but the most devout and inquisitive minds, the Librarium Sanguinis Theologicum. Here, behind obsidian doors etched with the wings of Sanguinius, the Council of Theologians convenes. This council is not an official organ of the chapter's command structure, nor do its members bear rank upon the battlefield, but their influence reverberates through every chapel, every initiation, every sacred hymn sung before battle. For they are the interpreters of the angel's signs, the chroniclers of the inexplicable. They sit robed in red and white, surrounded by texts centuries old, scrolls detailing the Sanguinor's appearances, accounts rendered in blood and ink from every corner of the galaxy. Their discussions are not idle speculations, they are spiritual dissections. Because to understand the Sanguinor is to understand the very soul of the Blood Angels. And to misinterpret him, that is to invite damnation through mistaken faith. The most ancient theory, oft repeated in the high liturgies of the chapter, suggests that the Sanguinor is the embodied will of Sanguinius himself. Not a ghost, not a relic, but a living shard of the Primarch's transcendent soul. The angel may have died in the Siege of Terra, they say, but his spiritual essence endured, elevated beyond mortal comprehension. Where his body fell, his spirit rose, and now walks the stars in armor of gold. This belief is the purest, the most accepted, and the most dangerous, because it skirts the line between worship of Sanguinius and heresy against the Emperor. Another school, more cautious and rooted in librarius doctrine, posits that the Sanguinor is a psychic construct, a warp echo generated by the collective anguish, honor, and devotion of the Blood Angels themselves. In this theory, the angel is not a being in the traditional sense, but a manifestation, like an elemental force. He is summoned not by prayer, but by the weight of emotion, by the spiritual gravity of the chapter's noblest moments. This aligns disturbingly well with what is known of the warp. That intense belief can shape reality. But if this is true, then the Sanguinor is a creation, not a savior, a reflection, not a guide. And worse, he could be a mask worn by something far darker. There are those who whisper that the Sanguinor is not divine at all, but a cursed remnant of the flaw that plagues the sons of Sanguinius, the black rage made noble, that he is a soul who succumbed to the madness, but did not descend into frothing violence. Instead, he rose, transformed by sheer will into something beautiful. This belief, held quietly by some chaplains, is the most tragic. It sees the Sanguinor not as an angel, but as a brother who conquered the worst of them and emerged transfigured, a martyr whose torment forged him into an immortal avenger. And yet, the most controversial voices belong to the Inquisition. Agents of the Ordo Hereticus, always wary of the line between miracle and mutation, have long kept secret dossiers on the Sanguinor. They do not see a savior, they see a symptom. To them, the Sanguinor is evidence that the Blood Angels have already stepped too far into the warp's embrace. They point to the angel's inexplicable appearances, his apparent immunity to detection, his silence, his glow, not as signs of divinity, but of demonic interference. Their worst fears imagine him as a warp entity, perhaps not a demon of the dark gods, but a creature of belief and psychic will, no less dangerous. They name him a psycho-idol, a being birthed by the collective trauma and veneration of a legion unable to let go of its lost father, a godling forged not in heaven, but in grief. This idea is so inflammatory that even speaking it aloud on Baal can warrant exile, or worse. And yet, not all Imperial scholars condemn him. Some within the Ordo Astartes see the Sanguinor as proof of the Emperor's continuing hand in the galaxy. a divine agent, subtle and terrifying, sent to shepherd the faithful through fire and ruin. These are the voices that push for recognition, for canonization. They would see the Sanguinor declared a living saint, a Primarch-born relic to be honored in basilicas and paraded before crusades. They argue that miracles are rare, and the Imperium cannot afford to ignore one made flesh. Between these factions, the Blood Angels remain silent. The chapter's leadership, measured, practical, bound by honor, refuses to define the Sanguinor. They do not deny him, but neither do they proclaim his divinity. They log his appearances. They reforge their broken doctrines in his image, but they do not presume to understand him. For them, he is a gift, a reminder, a warning, and a mystery best left unexplained. To the younger brothers, the initiates, the scouts who have only seen him in iconography or whispered legends, the Sanguinor is not a point of theological debate. He is a promise, a golden figure who will come when they are broken, alone and surrounded. A guardian. They do not ask what he is. They ask only, will he come for me? And perhaps that is where his true power lies, not in doctrine or dogma, but in faith. The Sanguinor transcends logic. He bypasses debate. He inspires. Whether he is a psychic echo, a soul reborn, a saint, or something darker still, he makes warriors stand when they should fall. He turns retreat into charge, despair into glory. His very presence is a weapon. In the end, the Council of Theologians concludes nothing. They rise from their seats in silence, robes sweeping over stone, candles flickering in their wake. They record their arguments in locked vaults, seal them with blood sigils, and descend once more into war and ritual. Their minds may hunger for answers, but their hearts know what truly matters. The Sanguinor exists, and when all else fails, when the rage takes hold, when the light dies, when the blood of angels stains the stars, he will descend again. Not because they understand him, but because they need him. The world of Kartas burned long before the Blood Angels arrived. Once a thriving forge moon in the shadow of the Sigil cluster, its atmosphere had turned to soot, its oceans boiled away into toxic storms, and its hives collapsed into their own foundations. The cause was not war in the traditional sense, but corruption, deep and unrelenting, birthed in the warp and born by traitorous hands. Kartas had been devoured from within, first by cults, then by pirates, and finally by the demonic. By the time the Blood Angels responded to the distress signals emanating from Kartas's final Vox beacon, there was little left to save. But that mattered not, for the sons of Sanguinius do not come to preserve territory or wealth. They come to preserve honor and to avenge the innocent. Captain Abel Zorael led the response, a hardened veteran of the Third Company known for his measured brutality and an unshakable devotion to the Reclusiam's tenets. His brothers followed him into hell willingly, drop pods screaming like iron thunderbolts through the poisoned skies of Kartas. Upon descent, they found what remained of the world's defenders, ragged PDF remnants, a shattered Mechanicus cohort, and screaming cults chanting beneath banners of brass and blood. But none of these were the true threat. In the crater of hive nausea, a force of ruin coiled beneath the surface. The demon Kabanda, the bloodthirster who had once fought Sanguinius during the siege of Cygnus Prime, had returned, summoned again by the blood spilled in his name and by the psychic echoes of old rage. This time he came not for a Primarch. He came for his legacy, for the sons, for vengeance. The first contact was a massacre. Zorael's vanguard landed at the mouth of Narzia's central vent. They found a battlefield already choked in gore and fire. The bloodthirster rose from the pit on wings of furnace smoke, his form colossal and seething, his voice a gale of hatred. 30 Astartes died in minutes. Some were crushed underfoot, others torn in half by the demon's axe, a weapon said to pulse with the heartbeat of 10,000 sacrifices. Zor-El fought like a lion, even after his armor cracked, even after his hearts faltered. He took Ka'Banda's blow full across the chest and was thrown like a broken doll across the crater's rim. He did not rise. The survivors, less than a squad, stood their ground nonetheless, bolters spitting into the maw of the abyss. Brother Librarian Issaros unleashed psychic fire until his mind bled from the strain. Sergeant Merok activated his gene seed detonator when surrounded by warp beasts, incinerating both allies and enemies in a white-hot plume. It was the end. There would be no evacuation, no reinforcements, no redemption. And then the sky broke. The survivors would later struggle to describe it. A scream without sound, a light without warmth, a presence without form. One moment the sky was filled with ash, the next it was gold. The Sanguinor descended not on wings of fire, but as a spear of wrath. His arrival was not gentle. He struck the earth like a god of vengeance, seismic shockwaves tearing open the crust of Kartus, splitting the ground in a jagged cruciform that pulsed with a halo of light. Ka'Banda turned, if a demon can feel surprise, it did then, and roared a name lost to time. Not Sanguinor. Something older, something buried in the warp's deepest caverns, something it feared. The two titans collided. No mortal could follow their movements. They fought not as man and demon, but as symbols made flesh. The glaive in carmine danced like lightning, meeting Ka'Banda's axe in a clash that split mountains. Each blow reverberated across the battlefield, flattening what few structures remained. The very air cried out, its molecules torn apart by the sheer velocity of their strikes. And as they fought, the Blood Angels rose again. Ribs broken, armor split, minds frayed by despair. They rose. The golden figure called them, not with words, not with banners or sermons, but with his presence, his radiance, his fury. Brother Issaros crawled to his feet, face half gone, and joined the charge. Merok, half burned, dragged a wounded brother from the fire and whispered, "He's real. He came." For 3 hours the battle raged, and for 3 hours the Sanguinor never faltered. He did not speak, he did not bleed, he did not hesitate. He fought with the precision of a blade long-honed, every movement carved from purpose. Where Ka'Banda struck like a storm, the Sanguinor danced like a star in motion, impossible to pin, impossible to predict. His armor, so bright it hurt to look at, pulsed with celestial energy. And in his eyes, so the survivors swore, burned the same sorrowful fire once carried by the Primarch. In the final moments, Ka'Banda launched himself into the sky, seeking to crush the Golden Warrior from above in a final ruinous blow. But the Sanguinor met him mid-air, wings flaring, glaive extended. They crashed together above the crater, and for a moment the stars dimmed. Then the demon fell. It crashed back into the pit that had birthed it, trailing ichor and smoke. It screamed its last curse to the uncaring stars, clawing at the edges of reality as it was banished back into the warp. The sky cleared, the wind died, the blood stopped flowing. The Sanguiner landed beside Zor-El's broken body. He knelt just once, placed a gauntlet over the captain's shattered chestplate, and vanished. There were no words, no message, no sign, only silence and the sound of the survivors weeping. Kartus was declared exterminatus 2 weeks later. The Mechanicus requested a cleansing strike to purge the world of warp taint. But the Blood Angels left behind a statue, carved from black basalt, shaped in the likeness of the Sanguinor. It stands where the crater was deepest, now fused into obsidian glass. It depicts the angel mid-strike, wings spread, eyes closed. At its base, engraved in High Gothic, are the words, "He came when we were ashes. He left us burning stars." No records of the battle were released to other chapters. No commendations were issued. The survivors were given time in the Basilica Penitentia to recover in quiet, their names omitted from the Book of Dead. They carried something heavier than honors. They had seen the wrath of gold, and they would never forget it. The Battle of Kartas became more than a tale of survival. It became a turning point in the legend of the Sanguinor. No longer was he seen as merely a guardian. Now he was vengeance incarnate, the hand that punishes, the flame that consumes the enemies of Sanguinius, not with mercy, but with unrelenting righteous annihilation. He is not summoned, he is not prayed to. He comes when needed, and when he does, the stars tremble and the galaxy remembers. For where the Sanguinor lands, the fires of retribution burn eternal. There are stories whispered between battle brethren in the silence before war. Not the grand crusades sung in liturgical hymns, nor the ancient tragedies scrawled in ink across parchment by dusty reclusiarchs, but the quiet, smoldering tales that never reach the halls of record. These stories do not speak of glory, they speak of survival, of horror, of salvation found not in force of arms or tactical brilliance, but in something else entirely, something unknowable, something golden. One such story comes from the hushed remnants of the Terror Claw assault, a mission so obscure that it barely exists within the chapter's historical annals. Officially, it was logged as a failed boarding action against a drifting Chaos warship, a blip in a vast campaign of retribution against the Night Lords. But to those who lived through it, it was something far greater, something unforgettable. The Terror Claw was a relic of the Long War, a vicious murder barge belonging to the Night Lords, scabbed with hull scars, studded with bone trophies, and veined with pulsating demonic circuitry. It drifted near the edge of the Graxis expanse, absorbing transmissions and siphoning energy from nearby stations. Every astropath who attempted contact with it was driven to gibbering madness. Reports from outposts described mass disappearances, silent stations, and distress beacons that stopped mid-scream. The Blood Angels' Fifth Company was dispatched, alongside an attached cadre of Death Company veterans, whose black rage could be leveraged in the tight confines of a derelict ship. Captain Aradus Rafan led the mission, precise, methodical, but burning with a controlled fury beneath the surface. The Terror Claw was not just a target, it was a wound in the galaxy that needed cauterizing. The plan was clean. Tactical teleport insertions at 4 breach points, data core extraction, power decoupling, explosive charges to rend the vessel from its soul, then extraction and self-detonation. No glory, just erasure. But the warp does not care for plans. From the moment the Blood Angels materialized within the vessel's corridors, reality began to unravel. The halls were wrong. Too long, then too short. Walls pulsing like veins. Vox communications twisted with whispers. Time fractured, seconds stretching into hours, then snapping back like broken glass. Lights flickered not with electricity, but with the rhythmic beat of a distant, unseen heart. And then the Night Lords came. Not as warriors, as wraiths. They didn't charge. They stalked. They bled from the walls, shadows wearing ceramite, laughing in silence. They dragged brothers into darkness before a single shot could be fired. Sergeant Phalion reported seeing his reflection peel itself from the floor and strangle his apothecary. Brother Morax, one of the Death Company, tore out his own eyes, screaming that Sanguinius was burning in the walls. Even the most hardened Astartes, those steeped in centuries of battle, began to waver. The boarding party fractured, battle lines dissolved. Rafan's squad fought toward the central cathedral engine, its machinery grotesquely fused with the broken altar of some forgotten imperial chapel. Statues of the emperor hung inverted, weeping blood from empty sockets. Chanting echoed through the decks, not from voices, but from the ship itself. Within that cathedral, Rafan and his last 7 warriors made their final stand. They had no direction. The teleport homers had ceased functioning. The Vox was awash of static and screams. The Night Lords were closing in, some unseen, others brazen and taunting. They moved like ghosts, laughing in the pitch dark, their armor stained with ancient crimes. The Blood Angels formed a circle around the reliquary they'd salvaged from the warp-cursed sanctum, a fractured piece of the true chalice, a symbol they hoped to reclaim from desecration. And then came the cold. A silence deeper than any void washed through the chamber. Even the Night Lords paused, a weight pressed upon the deck like judgment incarnate. Lights guttered to nothing. The air grew thick with pressure and purity, as though the warp itself recoiled. And into that silence stepped the Sanguinor. He did not fall from the sky this time. There was no crashing comet, no radiant beacon heralding his arrival. He simply appeared, as though he had always been there, waiting in the corner of sight, watching from between moments. The Blood Angels fell to their knees, not in worship, but in surrender. Surrender to a presence that banished fear with its sheer reality. Captain Rafan could only stare. The Sanguinor's golden armor blazed in the corrupted cathedral, but it did not illuminate. It cleansed. Filth turned to ash. Heretical banners withered. The defiled altar cracked as the angel stepped past it, and the Night Lords, creatures born of terror, fled. Some screamed, others dropped their weapons and clawed at the walls, desperate to escape. One, a champion known as Lucen the Pale, dared to challenge the golden figure. He rushed forward with a lightning claw crackling in blasphemous arcs and was caught mid-strike. The Sanguinor didn't parry. He merely raised one hand and the claw shattered into dust. With a single movement, he plunged his glaive into Lucan's chest, not killing him outright, but pinning him against the desecrated altar like a martyr of inverse purpose. And still the Sanguinor did not speak. He turned, golden wings outstretched, and walked to the wounded brothers. One by one, he touched their foreheads. Rafen would later describe it as a burning ice, a purity so absolute it scoured the soul raw, not healing but revealing. Each brother felt the burden of their flaws lifted, their failures stripped away until only devotion remained. For a moment they became more than Astartes. They became the echo of Sanguinius himself. Then, just as he had arrived, the Sanguinor vanished. No teleportation signature, no warp distortion, no door opened. He simply ceased to be. What followed was no miracle. The ship remained haunted. The Night Lords still prowled the decks, but the Blood Angels no longer felt lost. Their path was clear. With renewed focus, they completed the mission, planted charges, severed the warp core, and exfiltrated through a desperate boarding maneuver that left half their remaining strength dead. But they lived, and the reliquary was reclaimed. Rafan recorded his experience not in tactical logs, but in a single letter addressed to the chaplaincy of Baal. It was short, written in shaking script, and locked with his own blood. It read, "He came in silence. He judged without words, and in his gaze I saw who I could be, if I was brave enough to become it." That letter is now kept within a hidden reliquary, placed beside the preserved shard of the true chalice recovered that day. Initiates who take their final vows are permitted to read it once, just once, and are told to consider what it means to be seen by the angel. For the Sanguinor did not save them with fire or strength. He saved them by reminding them of who they were meant to be. Not weapons, not tools, angels. And sometimes when the void is quiet and the stars flicker just so, those few survivors of the Terror Claw say they can still feel him, watching from somewhere between the heartbeat and the breath, waiting not to protect, but to redeem. The world of Skylos was a jewel once, a gleaming orb of sapphire oceans and crystalline spires nestled in the glittering arc of the Tridalis Vale. It was not a place of war, but of peace, a paradise maintained by quiet mechanicum enclaves and serene ecclesiarchal sanctuaries. It had been untouched by major conflict for centuries, its name absent from the endless lists of martyrs and massacres that scarred the records of the Imperium. That peace, as with all things in the galaxy, was never meant to last. When Hive Fleet Leviathan came, it came not like a wave, but like a tide that had always been there, only now noticed, an endless swarm of chitin and claw, of endless hunger and silence. Skylos was not prepared. Its void defenses were ornamental, its armies ceremonial. By the time the first spore ships split atmosphere, the world had already been marked for death. The Blood Angels came late, not for lack of effort. Captain Ptolemy of the Second Company had scrambled his strike cruiser the moment astropathic fragments reached Baal, but the warp seethed in those days. Storms born from the cicatrix maledictum had twisted the stars into screaming nightmares. It took weeks to arrive, and when they did, they found a corpse. The outer colonies were gone. The atmosphere reeked of biomass decay. Cities once proud had become hives in a new, horrifying sense, infested with tyrannid bioforms, their towers hollowed and webbed with mucus canals and birthing sacs. Skylos had become a larder, but the Blood Angels did not retreat. They landed amidst the devastation, setting up staging points within ruined cathedrams and shattered manufactura. Every day was a battle. Every street had to be reclaimed inch by inch. There were no clear fronts, only endless claws coming from all directions, and the red-armored warriors trying to hold the line with bolter and blade. For 7 years, they endured. 7 years. Ptolemy and his brothers, cut off from reinforcements, supplies, and hope, fought a war of attrition against the most implacable enemy the galaxy has ever known. They watched one another fall, not to the claws of the tyrannids, but to hunger, to fatigue, to the black rage. Brothers turned into shadows of themselves, roaring the name of Horus into the abyss, and charging forward with no thought of survival. Chaplains broke, apothecaries ran out of genocide vials, rations became a memory. By the final year, less than 30 Marines remained, 28 to be precise. 28 warriors standing between annihilation and one final bastion, a crumbling pre-imperial communications tower perched above the remains of a hive spire. It was the last structure still broadcasting anything beyond static, and it was here that Ptolemy made his stand. Not to win, not to survive, but to send one final message, not of warning, not of fear, but of defiance. They dug trenches in ferrocrete courtyards, placed mines along hollow thoroughfares, turned shattered statues into barricades. They sang the litanies of Sanguinius, not in hope, but in remembrance. They did not speak of rescue. They did not pray for salvation. They prepared to die as their Primarch had, in the jaws of monsters, surrounded by blood, unbowed. And then the wind changed. Skylos had long since lost its natural breezes. The spores choked the air. The scent of ammonia and rotten flesh was all the world had known for years. But that morning, as the skies above the tower shimmered with approaching winged horrors, something shifted. The air cleared, just slightly, just enough. Enough for the Blood Angels to raise their eyes and see it, something golden falling from the clouds, not fast, not furious, graceful, silent. A shape, wings spread like solar sails, armor that radiated not with light but with meaning, a glaive trailing fire, and a presence so profound that even the Xenos paused. The Sanguinor had come to Skylos. They did not believe it at first. How could they? After years of silence, of dying in forgotten alleys and abandoned shrines, how could such a thing come now? But belief was irrelevant. He had come. He landed at the center of their lines, between two crumbling statues of Sanguinius. He did not speak. He did not gesture. But they understood. They fought like gods. The final assault began at dusk. Winged hive tyrants, their bioplasma cannons glowing with lethal promise, dove from the sky. Swarms of gaunts poured from subterranean tunnels, like flowing rivers of teeth. Carnifexes slammed through outer barricades with the inevitability of avalanches. And yet, the Blood Angels did not break. They surged forward, led by the golden flame at their center. The Sanguinor moved with an elegance that defied biology. Every strike was art, every motion poetry. His glaive cleaved monsters in two, bisected synapse beasts, sent shockwaves that broke lictors mid-pounce. Captain Toloman, mortally wounded and held upright by sheer faith, pressed into the front ranks beside him. He swore he saw wings of fire extend from the Sanguinor's back, not of metal, but of light, light that burned the filth from the sky. By the end of the night, the courtyard was silent. The Xenos were dead, not routed, dead. And yet the price was grave. Only 7 of the original 28 still stood. Toloman lay dying beneath a broken aquila, his last breath held as he watched the Sanguinor approach. The golden figure knelt. He placed his palm over the captain's chest, right above the secondary heart. A soft glow, no brighter than candlelight, pulsed from his fingers. Toloman did not die that night. He awoke 3 days later, his body healed beyond the apothecarian's understanding. The Sanguinor was gone. No one saw him leave. No ship was detected. No warp signature traced. But he had left a mark, not just on Toloman, on the tower. Above the battlement, in a place none could reach, someone, something, had etched a symbol into the stone. A single sigil in the shape of a sword with feathered wings. Beneath it, in high Gothic, 2 words, "Still watching. Skylos would never recover." The Mechanicus eventually declared it uninhabitable, and the remaining Blood Angels were evacuated months later by the Angels Vermilion. The war was over, the world was lost, but the story was not. The tale of the siege of Skylos is now taught in silence, not in lecture halls, not during briefings, but in the quiet moments between battles, in whispered recollections shared by those who have seen the edge of despair. It is a tale not of victory, but of meaning, of the moment when warriors who had nothing left stood tall and were met by the impossible. The Sanguinor did not save Skylos, but he saved its sons, and perhaps in the end that was all that mattered. If the siege of Skylos was the Sanguinor's silent promise to the dying, then the events that unfolded in the Cryptus system were his declaration to the living that his presence was not confined to forlorn last stands or forgotten ruins. It was in Cryptus that the Sanguinor, herald of Sanguinius, descended not just as a savior of his kin, but as a golden blade woven into the most unlikely alliance the Imperium has ever witnessed. The Cryptus system, once a vibrant cluster of industrial worlds and ecclesiarchal colonies, had been under constant watch due to its proximity to the Great Rift. It was home to several strategic bastions and a flotilla of Mechanicus assets, yet it would become infamous for something else entirely, its near-total extinction during the Tyranid onslaught. Hive Fleet Leviathan, that eternal predator, descended upon Kryptis like a famine incarnate. Entire planets disappeared under its tide, their biomass siphoned to feed the swarm's insatiable hunger. At the heart of the system was the planet of Lysios, a verdant agri-world turned charnel house. Its skies blackened with spores, its fields churned into nests. Lysios marked the point at which the Blood Angels were drawn into the fray. Commanded by none other than Lord Commander Dante himself, the Blood Angels and their successor chapters, Flesh, Tearers, Angels in Carmine, and others, assembled to protect what little remained of the Imperium's presence. But this was no ordinary campaign. This was not a war for glory. It was a war for survival. And it would not be fought alone. In the depths of the system, deep beneath the ruins of a long-dead moon called Thanatos, lay an ancient Necron installation, forgotten by the stars, dormant through ages of silence. When the Hive Fleet descended upon the world, their psychic pressure stirred something within its tomb. And when the Tyranids breached the outer vaults, a lord awakened. Anrakir the Traveler, an anomaly among his kind, more philosopher than despot, emerged from stasis and recognized a rare truth. The Tyranids were a threat not just to man or machine, but to all life, synthetic or organic. What followed was not diplomacy in the traditional sense. The Necrons and Blood Angels did not meet at tables or share coded banners. Their pact was forged in the pressure of extinction. When Dante stood atop the ruins of Lysios, blades wet with ichor, he beheld Necron warriors advancing in formation beside his own brothers. The universe, it seemed, had grown stranger than even the Reclusiarchs had preached, but nothing prepared the warriors of either race for what followed. The Necrons revealed a weapon, the Magnovitrium Starflame, a planetary defense device capable of turning a sun's radiation into a focused beam of annihilation. It could scour a system clean, purging even Tyranid hive ships in orbit. But it required time, calibration, activation, protection. Time the swarm would not allow. It was in those final hours when the sky over Lysios turned black with mycetic spores and the ground quaked beneath Tyranid monstrosities that the Sanguinor returned. His descent was silent but unmistakable. Unlike previous interventions, there was no desperation in the air, no last gasp of a dying force. The warriors of the Imperium and the Necrons were not losing. They were simply overwhelmed. And yet, the appearance of the golden figure turned the tide not by power, but by unity. He landed upon the Spire of Sorrow, the central defense tower overseeing the Starflame's firing matrix. The Sanguinor did not attack. He did not speak. He merely stood, wings outstretched, facing the Tyranid tide as it poured through the cratered hills beyond. And the tide stopped. Not physically, not in any measurable sense, but the swarm slowed, as if momentarily unsure, as if some primal aspect of their hive mind registered the arrival of something other. The Blood Angels rallied. Reinvigorated by his presence, their formations tightened. Devastator squads held fast. Assault Marines surged forward. Even the Flesh Terrors, ever on the brink of fratricidal madness, fell into line, drawn into formation like iron filings to a lodestone. And the Necrons? They did not recoil. Anrakir himself, mounted atop his command dais, turned his gaze toward the Sanguinor. For a brief moment, observers swore that the Necron Lord nodded. Not in deference, but in recognition. Together, they held. The final push came like an avalanche, Trigons, Carnifexes, and Haraspexes in numbers that defied logic. The Sanguinor did not retreat. He waded into the storm, his glaive rising and falling with mechanical precision and unearthly grace. Each stroke severed not just flesh, but momentum. He moved like light refracted through a stained glass window, impossibly beautiful. untouchably fierce. When the star flame was ready, it required manual guidance of the targeting array, an act that demanded one to remain within the central tower during the solar discharge. To stay behind was suicide. It was the Sanguinor who entered the tower. He did not ask. He did not wait. He simply moved, a golden streak through the ash, and vanished into the control sanctum. The moment the solar focus aligned, the sky itself ignited. A beam of focused stellar fire lanced from the orbital relays. It swept across the Tyranid fleet, catching void whales, hive ships, and kraken spawn in its path. The darkness that had loomed over the system for years was seared away in a single hour. Lysios's sun blazed like a newborn star. The great devourer, at least in this system, was broken. When the smoke cleared and the towers cooled, the Sanguinor was gone. He had left behind no trace. The control sanctum was undamaged, its doors sealed. The golden footprints that had scorched themselves into the floor had vanished. Only the reliquary of the star flame, once cold and inert, now glowed faintly, its crystalline edges marked with a symbol none recognized, a sword and wings. Dante did not question it. He merely bowed his head. The records of the Cryptus campaign remain sparse in detail when it comes to the Sanguinor's role. The Ordo Xenos, upon reviewing post-battle data, dismissed reports of the Golden Warrior as battlefield hallucination, psychic bleed, or worst of all, a warp echo. The Necrons, for their part, offered no explanation. Anrakir made no comment. But among the sons of Sanguinius, it was understood. The Sanguinor had come not only to protect, but to bear witness, to stand between ancient enemies who became temporary allies, to serve as a silent bridge across a chasm of hatred and history. For in the face of the true enemy, even gods must lay down pride. And so the legend grew. He is more than a savior now. He is the blade of unity, the last light in a broken alliance, and the proof that sometimes, when the galaxy teeters on the brink, the angel in gold descends not to save the few, but to remind all of what could be, if only for a moment the stars chose to fight as one. The world of Tydor was never meant to matter. It was a backwater planet in a largely unremarkable system, its surface divided between wind-scoured mesas and deep, mineral-rich canyons. Its cities, if they could be called such, were hives in name only, little more than feudal fortresses surrounded by farming communes and forge hamlets. But the Imperium has a cruel sense of irony. When the galaxy began to tear itself apart under the weight of the Cicatrix maledictum, it was worlds like Tydor, ignored, underdefended, strategically invisible, that became battlegrounds for some of the most desperate wars ever fought. The arch-heresy of Dormet was born in whispers. A failed imperial nobleman, Lord Baster Calvin, fled the Segmentum Solar after accusations of Psyker heresy. Somehow he escaped the notice of the Black Ships. Somehow he survived the warp storms. And somehow he emerged on Tydor, crowned by corruption and carrying within his soul a shard of something ancient, malevolent, and patient. He didn't raise armies in the usual way. He seduced. Preachers turned their sermons toward dreams. Feudal lords received visions in the night and woke swearing oaths to invisible kings. The Mechanicus outposts went silent, soon found converted into manufactories for hellish war machines. And when the first guard garrison tried to restore order, they were pulled into the soil, screaming as the planet itself rose against them. The Black Legion followed. Word of Calvin's rebellion eventually reached Terra, not through astropathic communique, but from the mouth of a single dying sister of battle who crawled into orbit aboard a burning drop shuttle, her hands carved with cryptic runes. What she spoke before death sent a chill even through the halls of the Inquisition. The angel bleeds beneath a black sun. The golden one watches but cannot act. You must send them. The message was intercepted by a blood angel's fleet patrolling near the edge of Segmentum Obscurus. Within hours, Dante himself mobilized. The war that followed was no mere campaign. It was an act of purification. When the blood angels arrived in system, they found Tidor shrouded in a permanent eclipse, an artificial construct, an arcane engine hovering in geostationary orbit that blotted out the sun. Beneath this dying sky, Black Legion warbands stalked the surface, leading hosts of traitor guardsmen and demonic entities birthed from the soil. The planet's energy grid pulsed with warp-born hymns. Dante brought his finest: the First Company, the Sanguinary Guard, and Astorath, the Grim himself. The Flesh-Tearers joined them, led by Gabriel Seth. Others followed, successor chapters who had not answered a call, but had felt an instinctual pull, a dream of blood and fire that would not fade until they came. Tidor became a crucible. The Imperials made landfall under constant bombardment. The terrain itself betrayed them, canyons shifting, rock formations screaming as they bled. The taint ran deep, but the sons of Sanguinius pressed forward. Every inch was paid for in blood. From the black spires of Voron Hollow to the screaming lakes of Calora Basin, the Blood Angels battled not only the traitors but their own dark impulses. The red thirst clawed at them. The black rage took many, and Calvin watched it all from his throne at the heart of Fellhaven Keep, seated atop a dais of skulls and warp metal, surrounded by a pantheon of lesser demons and his Black Legion bodyguard. To him, the battle was entertainment, each fallen Astartes, another soul for his growing pantheon, until the day the Sanguinor came. It happened at the peak of the campaign during what the Reclusiarchs now call the Rally at Dormet's Wrath, a valley choked in red fog where 3 companies were pinned between 2 converging warbands. Dante led from the front, his inferno pistol spitting holy death. Astorath stood to his right, a whirlwind of rage and scripture, but they were outnumbered 10-1, and the warp storm above made retreat impossible. The Black Legion advanced with confidence. They chanted no war cries, gave no battle howls. They simply marched, inevitable, unstoppable. The moment was as bleak as any the Blood Angels had faced since the devastation of Baal. And then the air shattered. There was no light, no trumpet blast, no heavenly crescendo. Just a sudden silence, like the pause between lightning and thunder. And then, as if reality itself bent in reverence, the Sanguinor descended. He did not fall. He drifted. Golden wings unfurled against the black eclipse above, gleaming with ethereal fire. His glaive glowed with a light that made the traitors recoil, as if struck by memory itself. He passed through the enemy line like a blade through cloth, never slowing, never halting. He landed beside Dante and Astorath without a word. Neither commander questioned it. Dante bowed his head for the briefest second. Astorath did not speak, but clenched his Crozius tighter. They had seen him before, Dante at Baal, Astorath during the redemption of Iskar. Both knew what his presence meant. They charged. The battle that followed was not war, it was purification. The Sanguinor moved with a grace that defied physics, carving a path through the Black Legion's champions as though they were mere shadows. Traitor sorcerers screamed incantations, bolts of warp fire twisted midair and rebounded upon them. One summoned a warp beast from a rift in the ground, only for the Sanguinor to banish it with a single touch. Dante and Astorath became extensions of his fury. For that moment, the 3 figures were as one, gold, crimson, and black, streaking across the field like a divine trinity of vengeance. Traitor morale broke. The advance faltered. Atop the black cliffs overlooking Dormet's Wrath, Calvin watched. He knew He had read the prophecies. The angel was never supposed to come. And yet, there he stood. Calvin fled. He ordered the Eclipse engine overloaded. If he could not win, he would blind the Imperials forever. But the Sanguinor was faster. He soared upward past the retreating traitors into the eclipse-shadowed sky. Witnesses said his wings left trails of fire across the heavens. He struck the engine core with such force that the entire construct shattered into falling debris, raining golden embers upon the battlefield. In its place, the real sun shone again, its light slicing through the darkness as the blood angels roared. The rally became a rout. Calvin was hunted through his own keep, his throne torn down by Gabriel Seth, his soul devoured by the very demon he had once worshipped. Tidor was reclaimed, but the Sanguinor did not stay. By the time the Imperials reached the ruins of the Eclipse engine, he was gone. Only a scorched sigil remained, burned into the metal, untouched by fire or time. A blade and wings. Tidor was eventually restored, fortified by the Mechanicus, and rededicated to the Emperor's light. But its people, those few who had survived, remember the angel. They speak of him in their rites, in their oaths, in their dreams. They no longer pray for salvation. They pray for the chance to be worthy of his return. And the sons of Sanguinius? They remember Dormet not just as a victory, but as a lesson, that the Golden Angel does not always come to save the dying. Sometimes he comes to remind the living of who they still are. There are some moments in Imperial history so shrouded in reverence and awe that they can only be spoken of in whispers, as if the weight of their meaning might fracture the world anew. Such was the moment when the Sanguinor came not to a battlefield or besieged city, but to the dying soul of a single man. Not a nameless warrior clawing for life in the mud, nor a final stand among alien horrors, but to the end of Commander Dante, the oldest living Astartes of the Adeptus Astartes, Lord of the Blood Angels. It was not during the height of battle that this moment occurred, but in the quiet that follows it. Baal had survived annihilation by the thinnest edge of fate. The Tyrannid hive fleet Leviathan had fallen upon the red sands of the Blood Angels' homeworld like a swarm of locusts on fire, turning oceans of dust into seething, chitinous hell. Dante had led the defense with a warrior's dignity, even as hope withered. And then, from the dark, the Indomitus Crusade had come. Robute Guillemon himself had arrived with a fresh host of Primaris Marines, driving the Tyrannids into oblivion in one of the most fortuitous interventions in recent history. But the war had taken its toll. Dante, who had stood unbroken for over 1,000 years, felt the price of every wound. His armor was shattered, repaired too many times. His flesh, though gene-forged, bore scars even the apothecarian could no longer mend. He had led with iron, with fury, with faith. But faith is a burning thing, and Dante had burned longer than any soul should. When peace, if it could be called that, settled over Baal, the Lord of the Blood Angels withdrew from the public eye. He spoke only to chaplains. He walked alone through the ruins of Angel's Fall, a place where statues of Sanguinius had once stood before they were toppled in the bombardments. He spent hours in silence at the shrine of the Red Grail. There was something final about his every motion. The Sanguinary Guard watched but did not interfere. They knew. Every warrior on Baal knew. Dante was dying, not from a wound, not from a Xenos toxin or warp corruption, but from the weight of time, from the burden of having carried his chapter for too long. The oldest hero of the Imperium, too stubborn to fall on the battlefield, now stood at the edge of the cliff, waiting for the wind to carry him over. It was in the ruins of the Chapel of the Winged Flame, late into the Baalite night, that the Sanguinor came. The chapel was nothing now. its roof gone, its golden aquilus scorched to blackened husks. Its pews had been used for barricades, its reliquaries shattered by tyrannid claws. And there, in the open heart of that dead sanctuary, Dante knelt in his battle-worn armor, sword across his lap, head bowed beneath the stars. He was not praying, he was waiting, and he was not alone. The air grew heavy first, not with pressure, but with something deeper. The weight of presence, a hush that fell over the ruins like the blanket of reverence in a cathedral before a sacred rite. Even the desert winds stilled, even the ash swirling from far-off craters paused in its descent. Then came the golden light. It was not fire, it was not warmth, it was memory. Dante opened his eyes. Before him stood the Sanguinor. But something was different. He was not ablaze with fury. His glaive was not drawn. His armor bore no blood. He was still, serene. Not a warrior, but a witness, a messenger. Dante rose slowly, every joint aching, but his gaze never wavered. "Have you come to take me?" he asked, voice gravel-worn by centuries of command. The Sanguinor said nothing. Instead, he stepped aside, and from behind him, another figure emerged. It was not a dream. It was not a hallucination. It was not a psychic trick. It was Sanguinius. Not as the blood angels remembered him from his final moments, wreathed in rage, torn by Horus, bathed in his own blood, but as he was in life, radiant, beautiful, stern and kind, impossibly noble, the very image of the Emperor's vision. He walked with the grace of a god and the weight of a father who had come to bid farewell to his most loyal son. Dante fell to his knees. Tears carved clean paths down his dust-caked face. "My lord," he whispered. Sanguinius said nothing for a time. He looked down at Dante not as a commander judges a subordinate, but as a father sees his child returned from war. When he spoke, it was not with sound, it was with memory, with meaning. "You have carried my name longer than I ever did. You bore my burden without faltering, even when all hope had fled. You became what I could not in a time I was not given, my greatest son." Dante wept, and in his tears was not sorrow, but peace. The Primarch extended his hand. Dante took it, and for a moment his pain was gone. The Sanguinor watched in silence, his wings folded. His duty was not to comfort, his duty was to witness. The light faded slowly, not as a candle dims, but as the sun sets, inevitable, beautiful, and final. When the sanguinary god found Dante the next morning, he was still kneeling. His sword rested across his knees, his head bowed. His face was calm, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. He was dead. There were no wounds, no toxins. His gene seed was intact, his body unmarked. But he was gone, and on the broken floor of the chapel, carved into the stone by no blade or tool, was the symbol of the winged sword. No one spoke. They did not need to. The blood angels buried Dante beneath the great vaults of the Tower of Echoes, in a crypt lit by starlight and inscribed with his deeds. Robout Guilliman himself attended the ceremony, offering no speech, only a salute. The sons of Sanguinius stood in rows of red and black and gold, and they did not mourn. They remembered, because the Sanguinor had come, not for battle, not for vengeance, but for goodbye. And in doing so, he gave the chapter something they had not known in many years: closure. Because if even Dante, whose soul bore the weight of 1,000 years of pain, could find peace, then so too could they. The legend of the Sanguinor did not end that night, but in the silence of the ruined chapel, beside the body of the Imperium's most steadfast defender. His role changed. He was no longer just a blade, he was a bridge. Between life and death, between despair and grace, between what the blood angels are and what, in their purest hearts, they still believe they can become. In the galaxy-spanning theater of endless war, where void ships drift like specters and planets burn as footnotes in forgotten campaigns, symbols are more than decoration. They are lifelines. In the bleak infinity of the 41st millennium, faith is not abstract. It is worn into the armor, carved into the bone, and swung in hand against the darkness. Nowhere is this more profoundly expressed than in the relics carried by the Sanguinor, the glaive in carmine, and the red grail. They are not mere weapons, nor holy tokens forged for ceremony. These are icons of the Blood Angel's deepest myths, made manifest through the figure that bears them. When the Sanguinor appears on the battlefield, he does not speak, he does not command, and he leaves no trace of his arrival or departure, but he brings these two relics always. And in them lies a story older than most stars. The glaive in carmine is not the first of its name. Countless warriors of the Blood Angels and their successors wield weapons bearing that sacred title, two-handed blades forged in the vaults beneath Baal's Forge Monasterium, blessed by the sanguinary priests and quenched in the ashes of the chapter's greatest heroes. These glaives are bestowed only upon the finest of the sanguinary guard, and even among them, few survive long enough to master the balance of weight and purpose they demand. But the weapon the Sanguinor carries is different, older, timeless. No artifix alive remembers its forging. No schemata exists in the archives of Mars or Baal. It bears no serial number. It was not named in any known log. Its blade gleams with a hue that does not match any known metal, half crimson, half gold, like a sunrise filtered through blood. Its hilt is wrought in the shape of Sanguinius' outstretched wings, and runes etched into the fuller shift beneath light, like living script. Some whisper that it was once held by the Primarch himself. Others, more superstitious, say it is not forged at all, but a part of the Sanguinor, a weapon shaped by his own soul, bound to his purpose as much as his wings or his silence. It strikes with the weight of destiny. In battle, it has been seen to cleave through Terminator plate as though it were parchment, to cut through demon flesh that defies all known metallurgy. Yet no one has ever examined it up close. When the Sanguinor vanishes, it vanishes with him. When he returns, it is once again in his hands, untouched by age or corrosion. Its power is not only in its edge. To those who fight beside him, the glaive is a banner more than a weapon. It becomes the eye of the storm. When he raises it, hearts steady. When he strikes, the rhythm of battle realigns. Marines on the brink of despair find themselves moving in unison with his swings, as if drawn into an ancient dance. Veterans have reported moments of clarity, memories not their own, flashes of angelic light, and the unmistakable sound of wings, when the glaive in carmine carves through enemy ranks. But it is the red grail that carries the deepest resonance. Its origin is cloaked in the mysteries of Blood Angel tradition. According to the sanguinary priests, the original Red Grail holds the transfigured blood of Sanguinius himself, drawn from his body in the final moments before he faced Horus in the Siege of Terra, preserved by the apothecarian of Baal in a reliquary never allowed to be seen by the unworthy. A single drop of that blood, they say, can ignite the soul of a Marine, bind his spirit to the legacy of the great angel, and elevate him beyond the flaw. The grail the Sanguinor carries is not that same relic. It is not stored in vaults, nor protected by codes and purity seals. It is always with him, held gently in one hand, even as the other brings down divine judgment. It glows not with warlight, but with quiet luminescence, casting a red warmth even in the coldest void. Unlike the glaive, the grail is rarely used in combat. It does not strike, does not shatter, does not lash out. Instead, it endures. It is offered. Witnesses, few as they are, describe moments during battle when the Sanguinor will pause, just for a breath, and extend the Grail toward a dying warrior. There is no speech, no benediction, only the act itself. And those who drink, if they survive, do not remain unchanged. One account comes from Brother Sergeant Helion of the Angels in Carmine, wounded during the defense of Sota's last bastion. His femur was shattered, lungs collapsed, and his vision flickered with the darkness of impending death. The Sanguinor appeared not with thunder, but as a golden silhouette wreathed in the smoke of exploded promethium tanks. Helion felt a presence kneel beside him. The Grail was offered. He drank. He awoke 3 days later in the Apothecarian, wounds healed, voice gone, but with a burning memory. Not of the Grail's taste, but of a face, Sanguinius's face, smiling down at him, sorrowful and proud. Helion never spoke again. He took the vow of silence and became one of the sanguinary priests. His skin now bears the sigil of the Grail over his heart, etched in silver. Some believe the Red Grail grants visions. Others believe it heals not the flesh, but the soul. Some say it simply gives a dying warrior enough strength to rise one last time and take 10 more foes with him. None can prove anything, but all believe, because belief is the point. To see the Sanguinor bearing both glaive and grail is to see Sanguinius distilled into symbols. One hand bears judgment, the other mercy. One cuts the impure, the other offers salvation. He is the duality of the angel, wrath and grace, death and life, vengeance and redemption. No records exist of the Sanguinor ever being disarmed. No relic has ever been recovered from the site of his appearances. Even among the Black Templars and Grey Knights, chapters known for their obsession with cataloging the esoteric, no one has succeeded in claiming the glaive or the grail. The only known instance of an attempt came during the Almaric Uprising, when a dying Inquisitor Lord tried to touch the Grail during a vision. Her hand passed through it as if through mist. She died moments later, smiling, eyes glowing with scarlet light. It is perhaps fitting then that the Sanguinor's relics are not relics in the conventional sense. They are not meant to be studied, stored, or wielded by others. They are meant to be seen. Their purpose is not to arm the faithful, but to remind them. Because in every swing of the glaive there is the promise of justice, and in every offering of the Grail the echo of forgiveness. In a galaxy where even angels are cursed, and gods are silent and light is fleeting, the Sanguinor comes bearing both. And for a moment, amidst the scream of war and the silence of stars, his emblems burn brighter than the sun. To the Blood Angels, the Sanguinor is a manifestation of all they revere and long for, the unbroken ideal of their Primarch, Sanguinius, carved into the storm of war like a golden flare of hope. But outside their crimson ranks, within the deeper, colder organs of the Imperium, the Sanguinor is not so easily accepted. For every hymn raised in his honor, there is a wary glance cast from across the stars, and for every tale of salvation, there is a whisper in a vault that warns of something far darker. Perception, in the Imperium, is as much a weapon as a bolter. And how the Sanguinor is perceived beyond Baal is as fragmented as the Imperium itself. Among the ecclesiarchy, for instance, the Sanguinor is both an inspiration and an enigma. While the official liturgies of the Adeptus Ministorum are tightly controlled, there are chapels, especially in sectors long protected by the Blood Angels or their successors, where votive candles are lit beneath shrines not of saints, but of the Golden Angel. These are not sanctioned, they are not endorsed by the Synod Ministra, and yet they persist. Because to the layman, the Sanguinor is not a theological problem, he is proof. Proof that someone, anyone, still watches from on high when the void claws too close. There are preachers who claim to have seen him in dreams, pilgrims who weep at statues carved in his image by hands that claim to have never held chisel nor hammer. On the agri world of Jarus Theta, where a cult uprising once threatened to destroy the entire planet's food supply, a single individual in gold was said to appear before a shrine and annihilate the cult's leader in the middle of his blasphemous sermon. No witnesses can agree on the details. Some say he came with thunder, others say he passed like wind through the congregation. But the cathedral stands untouched, its altar unsoiled, its relics unbroken, and the faithful of Jarus Theta now call him the Angel Silent. But the ecclesiarchy is not unified in their adoration. Cardinal Tribune Myriados of Ophelia Sauvanth once argued before the synod that the Sanguinor should be declared a living saint. He presented records of battlefield miracles, survivor testimonies, and sacred texts cross-referenced with apocalyptic prophecies. He was laughed out of the chamber. A week later, he was found dead, his throat cut, and his blood used to paint a crude symbol, an upside-down aquila with wings extended. The assassin was never found, and the file was sealed. The Inquisition, however, has no room for myth. They do not speak in parables or worship in stained glass sanctums. They operate in the shadows between stars, and to them, the Sanguinor is not an angel. He is an anomaly. Within the Ordo Hereticus, dossiers on the Sanguinor fill sub-level archives in cloisters across the Segmentum Solar. He is listed under multiple codifications. Asset X99, Anomaly Gold Tertius, subject of the Sanguine Echo. Some entries link him with phenomena described during warp breaches. Others compare him to psychic projections, similar to those produced by the Grey Knights during high-concentration rituals. One inquisitor, Lyra Vorens of Hydrafor, went so far as to call him a psychogenetic echo, a living psionic gestalt birthed from the combined psychic trauma and reverence of the Blood Angels chapter psyche. In her report, she wrote, "It is not a man. It is not even a spirit. It is a wound made beautiful, a rupture in reality where the Emperor's grace might once have stood, and now bleeds golden fire." Her colleagues disagreed. Some saw the Sanguinor as proof of demonkind's ability to deceive even the most faithful. To them, his silence is not nobility, but camouflage. His presence not salvation, but corruption in its most dangerous form, one that does not scream or twist, but heals and comforts while it enslaves. A warp entity born not of hate, but of yearning, one that feeds on grief, not blood. This is the Inquisition's fear, that he is not a tool of the Emperor, but a reflection of Sanguinius, sustained by the psychic anguish of his sons. That the Sanguinor is not sent by the light, but pulled from the dark by the screams of dying Astartes, who, in their last breath, cry out for a father long dead. And yet, for all their dread, no Inquisitor has ever ordered his destruction, because they can't. He leaves no trace. He answers no summons. He cannot be cornered, detained, analyzed. Attempts to entrap him have failed spectacularly. Vox nets collapse. Auspex arrays overheat. One Inquisitor, Cassandrel of the Ordo Xenos, attempted to mark him with a trace particle spore during a battle on Boron 6. The Sanguinor appeared directly behind her, placed a single hand on her pauldron, and vanished. The spore detonated 10 seconds later. Her retinue was incinerated. She was left untouched, but with her memory of the event entirely erased. All she recalled was the sound of feathers and a faint whisper, "This is not your realm." Among the Grey Knights, the Sanguinor occupies a rarer place still. The Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus is the Imperium's most finely tuned blade against demonic corruption, and yet even they maintain a sealed record of his appearances, viewable only by Grand Masters and librarians of the Fifth Seal. They do not call him demon. nor angel. They simply call him intercessor. During the defense of Auralis Prime, where a greater demon of Slainish attempted to breach reality through a tortured dreamscape shared by an entire hive city, a force of Grey Knights and Blood Angels found themselves overwhelmed. Psi wards failed, null fields collapsed. Librarian Master Calvor reported a brief moment when the Sanguinor stepped into the dream, not through warp gate or teleportarium, but through the reflection of a fallen guardsman's eye. The demon was cast out in seconds. Calvor awoke screaming, his armor scorched, but his purity unwavering. He left behind a single sentence in his codicium. He is not one of us, but he is not against us. Even the Mechanicus, whose reverence for data often supersedes their reverence for life, regard the Sanguinor as a non-classifiable anomaly. Their attempts to analyze residual energy at sites of his appearance yield only impossible readings. Harmonics that do not correspond to known frequencies, light emissions without source, gravitational flux without mass. One Magos errant of Styges, 8 proposed the existence of a pure principle, a theoric concept, a being that manifests at the convergence of maximum emotional entropy and structured spiritual will. But such concepts are theories, conjecture, and the Sanguinor is real. He leaves wounds stitched, foes shattered, warriors whole again, if only for one last charge. He is seen not by everyone, not always, but always when it matters, always when it's needed. And whether he is a blessing, a psychic construct, a curse, or a living fragment of a dead god, he is never forgotten. Across the Imperium, statues of the Sanguinor rise in secret, chapels built in silence, grails etched into armor trim, glaives forged not for use but for memory. He is revered by some, feared by others, but none can deny him. Because in every corner of the galaxy, even among those who doubt, even among the coldest and most calculating servants of the Emperor, there is the whispered truth. When the sky burns gold and the silence deepens, he is coming. In a galaxy where monuments crumble and heroes fade into the dust of forgotten wars, there are few things that endure beyond the ravages of time and tide. The Sanguinor is one of them, but his endurance is not in the form of command or conquest. It is not in the politics of sector-wide campaigns or the laurels won in great victories. His permanence lies in something far rarer: belief. The kind of belief that seeps into the bones of a chapter, that is whispered from battle brother to scout, and etched not just into scripture, but into soul. For all his myth and mystery, for all the questions surrounding his nature and purpose, the Sanguinor has become something the Imperium desperately lacks: a promise. A golden thread running through the fabric of the Blood Angels' identity, binding their past to their future, their sorrow to their hope. Among the sons of Sanguinius, this promise is not spoken of lightly. It is not debated in council halls or dissected by scholars. It is felt on the eve of war, in the moments between the first drop of blood and the final charge, in the stillness of the Reclusium, where warriors kneel before cracked relics and whisper words not meant for the ears of men. In those moments when they feel themselves slipping into despair, into rage, into the shadow of the flaw, they remember him, the Golden Angel, the one who comes not to lead but to answer. Over time, the presence of the Sanguinor has influenced more than just the faith of warriors. It has begun to shape the very doctrine of battle among the Blood Angels and their successors. Within the chapter's sacred texts, a strategy known as the Radiant Gambit has emerged, a deployment pattern modeled after the Sanguinor's own unpredictable interventions. It is built not on overwhelming force or precise coordination, but on calculated asymmetry and sudden, localized strikes. Veteran assault squads are held back, not as reserves, but as potential points of ascension. where the presence of the Sanguinor might be most needed. These squads are trained not only in combat, but in reverence, taught to hold their position as if the angel himself were watching. Some call it superstition, others call it strategy blessed by martyrdom. The truth is both. Beyond doctrine, there are the Sanguinary Guard, those golden-clad elite who serve as the protectors of the chapter's highest ideals. While they themselves are paragons of martial excellence, each one harbors a silent truth, that their greatest aspiration is not to lead or triumph, but to be worthy of the Sanguinor's presence. They see him not as a rival nor as a god, but as the culmination of what they all strive to be, a warrior who has transcended the burdens of flesh and flaw, a perfect mirror to the angel of blood, untainted by rage, unbroken by loss. It is no coincidence that new initiates are often shown statues of the Sanguinor before they are shown any depiction of Sanguinius. For while the Primarch is revered, he is also seen as unreachable, a legend so grand that it eclipses mortality. But the Sanguinor, he appears when needed. He descends into the filth, the fury, the fire, and that makes him possible. This hope, quiet but unyielding, ripples outward. On worlds far from Baal, planets that have never seen a blood angel, where the name Sanguinius is a whisper and the Emperor a fading light, the Sanguinor's legend still takes root. There are imperial shrines where golden-winged icons appear in frescoes unbidden, worlds where serfs report dreams of fire-haired warriors wreathed in gold who weep over the bodies of slain defenders, only to rise again and turn the tide. In some fringe systems, isolated guard regiments carry unofficial standards, unapproved by commissariat doctrine, bearing the symbol of a winged glaive over a red grail, stitched by hands that claim divine inspiration. The Imperium, for all its strength, is built on myth, and the Sanguinor, regardless of what he truly is, has become one of its most enduring myths in motion. But even myths evolve. Since the opening of the Great Rift, the galaxy has fractured into two mirror halves, one bathed in the Emperor's light and the other abandoned to the dark. The Blood Angels, stationed near the maelstrom of this galactic catastrophe, have found themselves at the fulcrum of endless war. Baal survived, but only just, and the Rift's storms have not abated. Every battle is now a greater trial, every call for aid a last plea. Yet the Sanguinor has not abandoned them. In fact, he appears more, not always to the Blood Angels, sometimes to their successors, sometimes to mortals. There are reports, hushed, often dismissed, of Astra Militarum platoons claiming to have been saved by a golden phantom that passed through enemy lines like a shadow of light. On Mordecai Refractus, a planet overrun by Drukhari raiders, a dying priest claimed the Sanguinor appeared before his altar and whispered a single phrase before vanishing into the dusk. Endure. He still watches. Even Guilliman's Primaris warriors, engineered for a future Sanguinius never lived to see, have begun to feel the echo of this presence. Many of them were not bred from Baal, nor bear the memories of the flaw, but those assigned to the Blood Angels have begun to report dreams, impressions of wings, of golden flame, of standing beneath a silent figure who offers neither order nor comfort, but purpose. And there is speculation, dangerous speculation, that the Sanguinor may be evolving as well. There are whispers that his appearances have changed subtly, his wings now broader, burning not just with light but with script, marks unseen before, etched in the glow, forming sacred words that flicker just on the edge of perception. That his armor now pulses with low sound, like a heartbeat beneath steel. That his presence is not just an answer to desperation, but a warning. That he comes not only to save, but to prepare, because perhaps the Sanguinor is not just a relic of what was. Perhaps he is a harbinger of what must be, a promise not only of hope, but of transformation. The Blood Angels, now more than ever, need that promise. Their numbers are diminished, their home remains scarred. The black rage still claims them, the red thirst still beckons. But within each brother lies a flicker of golden light, a memory, a prayer, a possibility, that one day when their soul stands between damnation and redemption, they too might rise, not as monsters, not as martyrs, but as angels. The Sanguinor is the fire they walk toward. He is the silhouette they chase in every charge, the silence that steadies their hearts before the first strike. And though he leaves no mark, no monument, no trail, he leaves them, changed, bound together by the silent vow he represents, that as long as faith endures, as long as honor burns, as long as there is one warrior willing to stand when all others fall, he will come again, not because they deserve it, but because they still believe. And in the age of darkness, when empires crumble and gods remain mute, that belief is enough to light the stars anew. In the shattered void of the Imperium Nihilus, where half the galaxy writhes in a lightless nightmare, there are stories not only of miracles, but of absence. Stories not of when the Sanguinor appeared, blazing with vengeance and divine wrath, but of when he did not. These are the moments the Blood Angels do not carve into their vaults. These are the moments not sung in hymnals or chronicled in golden script. These are the silences, the bitter absences that gnaw at the chapter's heart like a hidden wound. Because though the Sanguinor comes to the worthy, to the faithful, to the brink of annihilation, there are times when he does not, and those moments have their own power. One such silence unfolded upon the ash-choked world of Delcior V, a fortress moon long held by the Angels Vermilion, a fiercely devout Blood Angel's successor, chapter known for their purity rites and their harsh rejection of deviation from the Primarch's path. When the Night Lords descended on Delcior in a rare organized strike, the initial losses were catastrophic. Vox nets were shredded, the orbital defenses fell within hours, and the first and second companies were cut off during the initial defense of the Spire of St. Celine. For 3 days, the Angels Vermilion held. Chaplain Dean Elias called for aid, not from the Astra Militarum or even the nearby Crimson Tears, but from the Sanguinor himself. In the highest sanctum of their fortress, Elias lit every sacred candle, bled into the grail of remembrance, and intoned the rite of manifest radiance. Nothing came. He performed it again the next day, even as his brothers died in the corridors below. Still nothing. On the third night, with only a handful of his warriors remaining, Elias led a final charge into the enemy's heart, his voice roaring with scripture, his bolter empty, his crozius burning red-hot from overuse. He was last seen striking down a Night Lord's champion before being overwhelmed by a tide of corrupted gene seed berserkers. When the flesh terrors arrived days later to reclaim the ruins, they found the bodies of the Angels Vermilion in a circle around the Grail Room, blades broken, armor crushed, but their expressions serene. There was no sign of the Sanguinor, no trace of golden flame, no winged shadow. Only silence. This silence is not unknown to the Blood Angels. They remember Haraxos, where a reclusiarch and his retinue fought against a tide of Necron immortals, with the cry, "Let the angel come," repeated until their last breath, and no angel arrived. They recall Throvaris, where the arch-heretic Kol Sar offered the blood of 100 sanguinary priests to bait the Sanguinor into appearing, only to be met with a void so complete that even the stars above went dim. It is this mystery, that the Sanguinor chooses not only when to appear, but when not to, that troubles even the wisest of librarians. Because the Sanguinor is not bound by time or by communication, or by strategy. He does not answer distress calls. He does not follow warp beacons. He arrives when he must, and vanishes when he chooses. Why? Theories abound. One theory, whispered even among the most pious, is that the Sanguinor cannot come where doubt festers too deep. That when a chapter allows pride or desperation or secret heresy to poison its heart, he is repelled, not by disdain, but by spiritual discord. It is as if his essence cannot cross thresholds choked with fear disguised as faith. Others believe that the Sanguinor's absence is a test, a calculated silence meant to force his sons to become him, that he withholds his blade so that others may rise, that his glory is not a crutch but a standard, and that when he does not come it is because he expects you to become what he is. But there are darker interpretations. Some within the Inquisition suspect the Sanguinor is not a being of will at all, but of pattern, that his appearances and his absences are dictated not by morality or need, but by some deeper rhythm of the warp, that he is a psychic echo triggered only when enough minds align in a particular frequency of desperation. If this is true, it would mean his silence is not rejection, but simply a gap in the chord, a pause in a song that none can control. Yet the Blood Angels do not accept that. They cannot, because to do so would mean the Sanguinor is less than divine. And in a universe this cruel, they need their angel. But still, they remember the absences. Within the fortress monastery on Baal, there is a chamber that bears no name. It is locked, hidden behind a veil of psychic shadow. Only the most senior of chaplains are allowed entry. Within its stone halls are not relics of victory, but the armor of the fallen. Not names etched in glory, but names whispered in regret. It is here that the records of the unseen battles are kept. Scrolls and data slates that chronicle every major engagement where the Sanguinor did not appear. Each one is a lesson, a wound, a meditation on the question no warrior wishes to ask. Why not us? Brother Calvus of the Blood Sable, Chapter once wrote in his final entry, before marching into a hopeless battle against a demon prince of Khorne. We are not owed the angel. He is not our shield. He is our mirror. If we do not see him, it is because we have not become him. These absences, though painful, serve a purpose. They keep the Blood Angels honest. They remind them that the Sanguinor is not a weapon to be summoned, not a god to be bargained with. He is not theirs. He is not anyone's. He is truth. And truth does not always arrive when convenient. It arrives when it must. And sometimes the absence of the Sanguinor speaks louder than his presence. Because in those moments of silence, when the brothers of the angel fall one by one, when the blackness closes in, when no wings descend and no light pierces the storm, they are reminded that they must be enough, that they must rise not because they will be saved, but because they are the ones who must save. The silence is not betrayal, it is trust. And so, when the next battle comes, when the sky tears open and death screams down from orbit, the sons of Sanguinius still look to the clouds, still whisper his name, not because they expect him, but because if he does come, they know they are worthy, and if he doesn't, they know they will fight anyway, because his silence does not mark their failure, it marks their ascension. There is a word among the Blood Angels that is spoken not in war councils or sung in litanies, but passed in hushed tones between chaplains and librarians, hidden deep within the Reclusiarch's sealed catacombs beneath Baal, Ephialtes. It is a word taken from the oldest records of Sanguinius's visions, those he never shared in full, those purged from the annals of the Great Crusade and locked behind vaults of adamantium and sacred flame. Its meaning is lost in time, but those who have glimpsed the term in forbidden scrolls call it simply the final dream. And in that dream, so the whispers say, Sanguinius saw not only the treachery of Horus, not only his own death aboard the vengeful spirit, but something beyond it, a time of darkness deeper than the heresy, a reckoning not just for mankind, but for all life, a war not fought with legions or armies, but with symbols, with truths, with redemption. At the center of that vision, bathed in golden fire, stood the Sanguinor. The Blood Angels do not speak openly of prophecy. They are a chapter of deeds, not destinies. But even among the most pragmatic of their number, there is the sense, unspoken but ever present, that the Sanguinor is not merely a guardian or a relic of their pain, that he is part of something larger, that his appearances timed so precisely, so impossibly, are not isolated acts of divine intervention, but rehearsals. It begins with patterns. The librarians of Baal have long kept record of every confirmed sighting of the Sanguinor, and over the millennia, strange echoes have emerged, dates that fall on the anniversaries of Sanguinius's greatest deeds. Locations that mirror the constellation patterns visible from Baal during the Great Crusade. Even the tide of war itself seems to bend around his arrivals, as though the universe is drawing lines that only the faithful can see. And then there are the dreams. Among the most senior sanguinary priests, there are those who report waking visions, not induced by the black rage, but something else, clear, controlled, recurring. These visions show a burning sky and the ruins of Baal, not as they are now, but as they will be, blackened by fire, shattered by something immense and ancient. A final war beneath a fractured moon, where no reinforcements will come, only silence. And then, from that silence, a single shape descending with wings ablaze. The Sanguinor, not as he is now, but changed. Wreathed not just in gold, but in blood, his face no longer hidden by a mask, but revealed, noble, sorrowful, a mirror of Sanguinius in expression but not in form, taller, brighter, a being no longer merely summoned by desperation, but anchored to reality, embodied in it. An angel not just of deliverance, but of judgment. What does it mean? Some among the chaplaincy argue that the Sanguinor is becoming more real, that with every death, with every prayer, the psychic echo grows stronger, that one day he will no longer appear for moments, but remain, that he will step from myth into flesh. And when he does, it will not be to save a battle, it will be to save everything. This belief is not without consequence. It has reshaped the rites of succession among the Blood Angels elite. Some companies now raise a watchbearer, a warrior whose sole purpose is to record omens of the Sanguinor's coming. These warriors train not only in war, but in sacred analysis, interpreting sigils, mapping warp currents, observing celestial events for alignment with prophetic patterns. The Office of the Grail, Seers, once a ceremonial order, has returned to prominence. Their texts, long thought apocryphal, are now studied again. Not as myths, but as warning. Outside of Baal, others have noticed too. The Ordo Chronos, an obscure, often overlooked branch of the Inquisition, focused on anomalies in time and fate, has quietly increased its interest in Blood Angels sectors. Unexplained phenomena near the Great Rift have begun to cluster around known Sanguinor sightings, sudden stabilization of warp storms, psychic blackouts that leave astropaths weeping blood yet unharmed, entire populations experiencing collective dreams of a golden figure beneath a bleeding sky. Even the Mechanicus has grown uneasy. Magos Dominus Artel Van of the Phaedrax Forge, a heretic-turned-sanctioned savant, published a sealed thesis known only as Dei in Ascensum. In it, he posits that the Sanguinor is not an individual, but a quantum manifestation triggered by the cumulative sorrow and worship of a bloodline. an entity that gains reality only in proximity to the emotional resonance of a dying warrior's soul, and that over time the psychic charge of this pattern will reach a threshold, a crescendo. What follows that crescendo? Speculation turns apocalyptic. Some say the Sanguinor will become the next Saint Celestine, not merely appearing but living, wielding both blade and will, leading a new crusade in the Emperor's name. Others, more extreme, believe that he is the Emperor's final weapon, one that will awaken only when the God Emperor himself is near death to carry his flame into the next age of war. The most radical even claim the Sanguinor is the Emperor, his last true incarnation, split from his soul during the moment of his enthronement, set adrift in time and memory, to walk the galaxy until the end of all things. The Blood Angels, ever watchful, do not indulge such theories, but they watch, they record, they prepare. They build altars not just to honor the Sanguinor's past, but to welcome his future. On Bal Secundus, in the deepest crypt beneath the Chapel of Echoing Light, a vault has been sealed since the days of Dante's youth. Its lock requires the blood of 3 chapter masters to open. The inscription on its surface is simple, for when the last flame fades, what lies within, none alive now know. But it is said the key is a name never spoken, a name known only to the Sanguinor, a name that will mark the end, because every legend has a final verse, every prophecy has a moment it points toward. And while the Imperium drowns in war, and chaos laughs, and Xenos claws tighten around every world, the sons of Sanguinius still look skyward, not for a savior, but for the signal, for the final time when the Sanguinor will descend not as a ghost or a vision, but as a warrior of golden flame who does not vanish after the battle, the one who stays, the one who leads, the one who fights in the last war. And when that day comes, when the stars fall and hope burns low, when the flaw threatens to consume all that remains of honor and memory, the Blood Angels will rise, not alone, not broken, but with their angel among them. And the galaxy will learn in its dying breath that legends do not fade. They return, they ascend, they endure,